Welcome back to Module 1, Email Basics. Here in Lesson 4, we're talking about segmenting your list. This is about putting people into different categories so that you'll kind of know when to send them and you can send, different messages to different people. And we're going to go over that quickly in this lesson to get you started on the process so you'll be in a position to segment your list. Now, from the perspective of friends, you don't talk to all your friends in the same way, and your email is no different. You're going to need to calibrate email based upon the particular characteristics of people in or on your list. And so that's what segmenting is all about. And here in Lesson 4, you'll learn the basics of segmenting your email list. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the how you do it because that's going to depend on your specific system, but we'll talk generally about it. We'll talk about what segments all online entrepreneurs should create, and then how you can identify segments that you might want beyond kind of the ones that everybody needs. So for now, though, I want to point something out. We're talking about general segmenting. We're going to talk a lot more about segmenting during promotions in Module 6. That's not what we're talking about. So when you're in an active promotion period, whether it's a launch or just email promotions, you're going to want to be doing some tracking and some segmenting during that process. That we're going to talk about in the promotions module because it makes more sense there. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is this general segments you're going to want to set up for your list on an ongoing basis. So sending the right email to the right subscriber at the right time is only possible if you track relevant things about your subscribers, right? I mean, we know that. And I can use a very simple example. If someone has already bought your signature product, you don't want to send them an email inviting them to buy your signature product. So that's kind of a quick example of it, but you get the point that having information and tracking information about your subscribers allows you to really kind of target the messages you're going to send. And the best way to do this, or to track things about your subscribers, is by segmenting your overall list with things called tags and sublists. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on the technical things here, but depending on what email service provider you're using, you might have different lists, or you might have tags, or you might use both. But the point is that these are the technical things about how you go about segmenting people and keeping track of what's happening with your subscribers and kind of keeping the record of the relationship you've had to this date. Now, I want to do a warning here. Before we go too deep, don't go overboard. You don't need to create hundreds of segments. And for example, if there are like 3 people on your list that meet a certain characteristic, unless it's like a really important one, you don't need that to be segmented because you're not going to send an email to just 3 people. And what I mean by this is you're not going to craft different messages where, each message is only going to like 5 or 10 people. That's not going to be effective. Like the only time that might happen, and even with 3 or 5, you probably wouldn't do it, but you'll have some of those smaller segments during a promotion period, and we'll talk about that in Module 6. But from a larger perspective, you don't need that because you're not going to be tailoring messages for small groups. So that's what I'm saying here about don't be going overboard. Now, it might be that right now you only have 2 or 3 people in a segment, but it's a segment you expect to grow, and that's different. And if so, you can go ahead and set that up. But the overall thing is I don't want you to think you have to, segment and have really crazy maps so that you understand week in and week out, I rarely alter who's getting a message based upon any segmenting. Most times everyone is getting the same message. And so I give you that just so that you understand that this isn't something that you need to be creating tons and tons of. But you do want to do some of it. So you want to track the actions that subscribers have taken that could affect the messages you will send them in the future. So if it's something that you might want to be able to tailor a message on in the future, you need to be tracking that by segmenting your list. Again, either with tags or putting them into additional kind of sub-lists that allow you to do this. So let's start by talking about segments that all online entrepreneurs need. The first one is your weekly email list. So these are the people, you basically need to have a list of everyone who has gotten through the welcome sequence. Again, you'll remember from prior lessons when we talked about the journey in lesson 2, we went through kind of the 5-step journey. Once someone is through through the welcome sequence, they go onto your weekly email list. This list is think of it as your primary list. It is the list where if you're going to say, well, I'm going to send an email to my whole list, it's usually these people. You're normally not going to send, general emails to people who haven't gotten there yet. And let me be a little bit more concrete here. You won't send an email inviting people to a webinar, for example, to people who are in a nurture sequence or people who are in your welcome sequence still. They're not going to get invited to your promos. Only the people who've already gotten to your weekly email list will do that. So this is your core list, and you should have this. You should just have this and think of it as your primary list. Now, beyond that, you're going to have customer segments. And what I mean by customers is buyers. People who have bought from you, you should be able to identify, number one, that they've bought from you, but also what they've bought from you. So if you have multiple products, you need to have a way to segment people based upon each product that they bought. So for example, in my world, I would need to be able to send an email to everyone who has purchased my website policy pack. So everyone who's gotten my privacy policy, my terms of use, and my disclaimer for the website, I should be able to send a single email to that segment. Now, separately, I need to be able to send an email to people who've bought my Online Genius template library product. So I need to know that. So you can see how you need all of that. Now, other times you might want to just send an email to all customers as a thank you. Maybe you're going to do a sale or a promotion just for existing customers. You can see how you might do that. So you'll need to set up segments that cover pretty much all customers, but then also relevant sub-segments for different products that they have purchased. So that's kind of the second big group segment you need. Now, the final segment that we're going to talk about that every entrepreneur needs are freebie segments. In other words, you need to track what freebies people have downloaded or gotten access to if it's a core, a kind of a mini course or something like that. You need to know the different things that people have access to and have accessed. Because, for example, at some point in the future, you might want to invite people who've downloaded freebie 1 and tell them, hey, I've got this other freebie over here you might be interested in. Well, if they've already gotten the other freebie, you don't want to tell them about that. Similarly, if you have, one freebie that's about email and another freebie that's about list building, and someone has downloaded one but not the other, I might decide that I want to tailor the message I have if I'm inviting someone to a webinar about email. So if, for example, they've already taken my email marketing map assessment, I'm going to tailor my message to that group differently, for example, than someone who had just, downloaded my, a list building freebie, or who maybe had downloaded one of my legal side freebies. So I need to know what freebies they've downloaded so that I can tailor messages the right way. Now, again, I want to be clear. Just because you have these segmented out doesn't mean you're always going to use them. You just want to have them in case. And the important thing to understand here is that in some systems, depending on what email service provider you pick, you've got to tag them and segment them as it's happening, or you can't do it later. So that's why it's important to think about this and plan for it in advance. So those are the three big categories that everyone needs. Your overall weekly email list, your customer segments, and your freebie segments. Now let's talk about some segments that you might need based upon your potential business. One segment you might need is if you have different customer avatars. Let me give you a very concrete example of this from my business. It would be helpful to know that, this person is a course creator and this person is a service provider. Because if you think about it, I have different products to offer those different avatars. So if I know that information, that's something that is useful to know. You might have that because, they download a certain freebie, etc. But if you can put them into segments based upon the kind of avatar they are, that could be helpful. Let me give you another example of this outside of my business. Let's say you are someone who helps people lose weight and keep it off. Well, you want to know, is this someone who is in the phase where they want to lose weight or where they want to keep the weight off? Because you'll speak to them differently, you'll offer different products, etc. So that's kind of another example of different customer avatars that you might want to know. So again, if you have that data, if it's relevant to your business, if you serve multiple avatars, you'll want to have segments if you can. Next is related. It's stage of their journey. You might think of this as a different avatar, but it might be something separate. Like, it's one general avatar, but it's a beginning phase versus a later in their journey phase. This just lets you, again, maybe decide what products you might want to offer. Again, you may or may not ever use this, but it's something that could be useful if you are going to do a targeted promotion at some point in the future. So if this is relevant to you, you might want to include it. Now, a very specific thing, if you have a quiz, you will want to know the quiz results. But even beyond the quiz results themselves, you might have collected certain data or certain demographic information from the quiz that isn't necessarily in their result, but you might want to do this. Let me let you in on a little secret. Many quizzes, depending on whose guidance you follow, it's literally one question in the entire quiz that actually buckets you and puts you in the right results. Now, that's not how my email marketing map assessment works, but my email marketing map assessment, it's 4 of the questions that decide what your results are. And there are additional questions that I might want to have that information associated with the people so that I know things about them. Now, oftentimes the quiz results are relevant and other information you gather is relevant because that might be how you got a customer avatar segmenting or how you got stage of the journey segmenting that we talked about as the last 2 segments. But you'll want to have this information in your system. Now, other segments that can be useful is having a hot, warm, and cold segments. Now, this is a more advanced thing, and we'll talk about this later. I have a system built in so that over time, as people are opening or not opening emails, they're being moved between, are you a hot lead, a warm lead, or a cold lead? And I say lead here. This is really just subscribers. It's not even about whether they're likely to buy. It's just a sign of whether they're opening my emails. And there's some reasons you're going to want this. And we'll talk about scrubbing your list in a lesson to come here in this module, which this comes into that. But also, you may from time to time only want to send emails to your hot list, to the people who, for example, have opened an email in the last week or the last 2 weeks, depending on how frequently you're sending emails. Because those people are super active, and it can be a good sign to the email service provider if you send an email and all of a sudden, you send a few emails in a row that get 40% or open rates or 50% open rates, that can help your reputation score, if you will. So this can be a helpful thing to have. It requires some automation on the back end, but you might want to think about it. The good news is these are segments that you can build anytime. You don't have to do this at the beginning. So that's another group of segments you might lead. Then finally, you're going to want, or not finally, but one other thing you'll need is inactive leads. And this is what happens, and we'll talk about this when we scrub our list and we have that lesson. I have an entire list where when someone hasn't opened emails in a while and then doesn't respond during this list scrub sequence, they get taken off of my general weekly email list and get put on an inactive leads list. They're still in my system. They're still there. They have not asked to unsubscribe. They're simply not opening. You might want to have that. There are reasons why you will. You probably aren't going to email those people. Now, you might at some point in the future decide you want to try to re-engage them. But more importantly, you might want to use that list for Facebook ads. You might want to use that list and put some targeted ads on Facebook in front of those people because maybe they're still interested. Email just isn't the way to reach them. But you might want to have this list for that purpose. Then finally, one other thing I wanted to mention is if you have a membership where you have kind of people who subscribe, you want to have lists of the active subscribers. So for example, you don't want to just know that they have purchased, but you want to know that they have a current active subscription, which means they currently have access to the information, but it would also mean that they will continue to pay. So that's something that you might want to have as well, especially depending on how you're going to structure what you do within your membership. So those are the highlights of the different segments you might need. Now, there may be a few other that you think about your business. I'd also like to track this information. That's fine. But these are the core types of things you'll want to track and outside of a promotion period. And I want to be very clear, don't go overboard. You want to make sure that you're not creating a monster in your system that becomes unwieldy. And so be careful about that. This should have given you an idea. Now, take action now. Here's your homework. Create all the segments within your must-have, segments. So 3 must-have segments. So in other words, one of them is easy. It's just your overall weekly list. But then you need to think through, okay, what are all the products I have? So first of all, you need one segment for each of the product, but then also say, are there some that I should group together? Like example, my case, should I have a legal stuff buyers and a business stuff buyers, for example? That would be how you might want to think about it. So create all that, and then also the same with your freebies. So create those. Then identify which of these other segments that we've talked about you might want to include and go ahead and create those segments. So create those as well. And so that's your homework. And if you have technical questions, we can help you with that. But importantly, the concept here, when I say create it, I'm saying create it and then go into your system and go ahead and create the segments with either tags or lists so that they are set up and ready to go. So the key lesson takeaway here is to create segments in your list that will let you reach the right subscribers with the right message at the right time. That's the standard for segmenting. You don't need to segment if it would not affect the message you're going to send now or in the future. No reason to create a segment. Just leave them in a larger list. So that's your key lesson takeaway. Now, in the next list, we're going to talk about list scrubbing, which I talked about. We're going to talk about why you need to clean your list, how to conduct a list scrub manually, and then how to automate it. I'm just going to talk about that briefly, about how you can automate a list scrub sequence so it's just happening all the time in the background. I'll see you on the next lesson.